What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince talking today about the May 24th, 2024 landslide in Papua New Guinea on the island of New Guinea to the north of Australia. This was a big event. It was all over the news. If you saw it in the news, you might get a sense of why it was incredibly dramatic to look at. I can't show you any news images for copyright reasons, so I drew this in Microsoft Paint. This is generally what the slide would look like. Check out the links in the description. Tell me how I did on that, I guess. Going to try to use some models and diagrams here to talk about why this slide was so dynamic and so deadly in terms of the human toll. Started off being estimated about 670. It went as high as 2,000 for a period of time. That estimate was brought back down. I actually don't know where it is as of now. One way or another, there's a very significant human toll here, and there's some geologic reasons to go along with that. And when you look at this slide, it has certain recognizable features up at the top where the side of the mountain actually fell away. You can see this gray failure surface. It's very planar and sort of regular, if you will. It looks like kind of a flat gray slab. Down below that, the deposit of the slide tends to be this kind of yellow and tan rock. It's a different geologic material from the horizon in which the slide actually occurred. And this is a big feature. It's about 2,000 feet long. Down on one of the boulders there near the bottom of my drawn in slide, there's a tick mark that appears. That's about how big a person would be if you put them on top of this slide deposits. And needless to say, for folks who are in the way of this thing, there really wasn't much hope. Trying to figure it out has been a challenge for people on the ground. I have not been on the ground there myself, so everything I'm going to talk about is just what you can see remotely by looking at Google Earth. But knowing a thing or two about tectonics and geology in New Guinea, and just looking at what the land looks like in the area the slide occurred, it's possible to actually see some of the geologic details that contributed to what went on here. So first and foremost, the island of New Guinea in itself is probably one of, if arguably the most dynamic place tectonically on planet Earth, I think. Not many places like it, to say the least. Has a very interesting shape. A lot of people say the island looks like a bird, which I have artfully drawn in here. And up there where the beak and the eye is, that peninsula is actually called by some people the Vogelkop, which is Dutch for bird's head. The people living there, I think, call that the Doberai Peninsula, if I'm not mistaken. But the strange outline of the island in and of itself is a product of the really unusual tectonic plate boundaries around it and where plate movement and collision is producing mountain building and volcanoes and things like that. So the interesting shape of the island is only one consequence of the tectonic activity. The dynamic landscapes that you find there are very much another consequence of that. So there's, broadly speaking, plate convergence. Australia off to the left there is moving towards what's generally the Pacific plate up and right. There's all sorts of little microplates mixed in here. It's really complicated, but convergence is the name of the game here, and that's producing a big mountain range that runs up the spine of the island of New Guinea. The highest peak is just off the screen on the top there, but it's about 16,000 and change feet, about 5 kilometers above sea level. The deepest part of the ocean on the screen here is actually in this trench down here that's southeast of the island of New Britain. The depth there is about 25,000 feet, about 8 kilometers deep. So this is a very variable and dramatic part of the Earth's surface because there's just so much plate movement going on here. A lot of volcanic activity, in particular up here on the island of New Britain. Rabaul is up here at the tip of New Britain. Sort of a viral video on YouTube several years back of a volcanic explosion at Mount Tavurvur that was really close to Rabaul. That was up here on the tip of New Britain, and that volcanism extends down into the sort of the main part of the island of New Guinea as well. So there's a lot going on, and when you have this much tectonic movement, the plates are moving very quickly. This is essentially equatorial. I actually don't know exactly where the equator runs here, but for all intents and purposes, this is basically on the equator. Ocean basins all around it, plenty of moisture to be sourced. It's extremely rainy, so there's a tropical climate. There's really rapid squeezing up of rock because of the plate condition. There's a lot of rapid erosion with that. Rocks are actually being kind of pushed up and unburied out of the earth here just about as fast as anywhere on the surface of the planet. So it makes for a very changeable landscape. It also makes a really resource-rich landscape. So there's a lot going on in New Guinea, but that tectonic setting is the backdrop for this landslide, and of course the countless other ones that actually happen on this island throughout every year. So zooming in closer, slides at the tip of the arrow there, you can see some of these sweeping forms here. These are ridges of folded sedimentary rock in the Papua Fold Belt. This may be an old volcanic center right here. I can't quite tell, but it has the look, kind of has that grain of a volcanic type feature in Google Earth here. This is a big high plateau, about 13,000 feet, about 4 kilometers above sea level. And where the slide occurred is sort of right at the edge of the Papua Fold Belt and another geologic division of the island that would be up here to the north. This is kind of right in the guts of the island. It's a place where the rock has been very much squeezed and deformed, and that's something that you can see evidence of where the slide actually occurred. Zooming in further yet, we're looking sort of to the northeast here. You see along sort of like a ridge here, got a very prominent road that runs up to a big gold mine that's off the screen down and right. This ridge with this prominent grain on it is actually where the slide occurred. So the ridge has kind of that like slabby shape where it's sloping downhill towards the road. Geologists might call this a hogback. That's a term for a mountain or a ridge that's developed on some kind of a tilted geologic horizon. And looking even closer, draft in where the slide would be there, you get a sense that grain is tilting downhill towards that road, kind of like a stack of books. Now, if you have a bunch of books stacked up and you start to tilt that stack, the books will slide very easily along their covers. And that's kind of the setup that you're looking at here. And it's very well developed in Google Earth. It's pretty easy to see in Google Earth. So zooming in yet again and looking in from the top, there's kind of this slabby shape on the slope. You can see the road at the top of the screen. So downhill is actually toward the top of the screen in this view. And you can see like 1, 2, 3 sort of layered horizons. And I don't know for sure that those are something like sedimentary layers. I don't necessarily know for sure that they're different rock types, but everything that you can see in the slide would suggest they are. And what you see in the landscape would suggest that. Seeing this really flat, slabby hillside, that's bedrock controlled topography. And indeed, that's what failed. So this whole big slab of rock here ended up sliding off, making its way downhill, and that's what produced that extensive deposit that buried so much of the landscape. If you look at it sort of sighting right down that slabby hillside, kind of draw an orange line along sort of the break here on the slope. If you look at what slid away, there would be like a gap taken out of that. So a big thickness of rock, again, very, very slab-like in its geometry, cut loose there and made its way down the hill at high speed. Looking in from this direction, see something like this. You got the gray failure surface and then a different material up above that. This kind of yellow or white material, maybe kind of tan in color. That's really good at making boulders. And that's what you see comprising the majority of the deposit downslope. And it's pretty easy to see when you look at that very flat, smooth failure surface that this lighter colored rock horizon just broke loose off of that and made its way downhill. If you look at Google Earth closer to the time of the failure, this is 2020 imagery. Even up in 2023, I think, is some of the earliest imagery, the latest imagery that you can see on CNN. You see little divots and things like that along the hill slope where the failure ultimately occurred. And in the 2023 imagery on the CNN article, there's actually a small slide, very minor, shallow, didn't go very far, but it happened in the location that the big slide ultimately occurred. And this is probably evidence of what is coming, right? And the little model that you saw at the very beginning, to see it again, it has features like this in it where part of the model starts to move just a little bit and then it really breaks loose and produces this big extensive deposit. And that is what all of the evidence would suggest went on here in Papua New Guinea. So to turn this into kind of a block model, block diagram, got tilted horizons here. They tilt down slope. And the way this is drawn, it's implying that there's some kind of sedimentary layering. So you might have limestone or sandstone sitting above a weaker rock like a shale here. Don't know that that's necessarily what's present on the site, but it's very clear to see at that site that there are horizons that are different from one another that are tilting down the slope. Maybe you get a little bit of movement. You start to see a little bit of evidence of that on the hill slope, maybe just a little bit more. And right now it's kind of at the threshold of failing. And with these geologic conditions, when it goes, it's going to be really fast and it's going to be really dramatic. And that sliding slab of rock is going to break apart and you produce this huge stream of boulders. They're going to move very quickly and it's not survivable. You won't be able to run away from it. It's not something that you can hear happening, move away, and then watch it. It'll move far too quickly. And again, that's a product of this tilted bedrock geometry, having some kind of a weak horizon that's tilting very steeply, so that when the failure occurs, it's quick. And if you look up closer there, the reason you get so many boulders out of it is as that slab of rock comes down slope, it has to bend, if you will, right? The material slides roughly parallel to the slope at first, but for it to actually move, it has to kind of pop out of there. And when it does that, it's going to shatter the rock into the big boulders that end up tumbling down the slope. So when you look at this feature, that's kind of the visual you want to have, is this big slab breaking loose, and as it moves down slope, breaking apart and being very energetic. There's a lot of potential energy here. Big kind of rock avalanche landslides like this actually entrain air with them as they move down slope, and they become very mobile. It allows them to move thousands of feet really quickly. And from what you can see, that weak failure surface is sort of what's behind the movement here. Interestingly, there are off to the left here sort of like blocks of the lighter colored rock that sits on top of the gray that moved a little bit, but they didn't totally shatter and and completely turn into boulders. And those give the sense that that's the style of motion, I guess, that occurred everywhere. But for some reason, those just weren't quite as dynamic. They weren't able to shatter and break up and take advantage of all that energy to go as far as the rest of the deposit. Over to the right of these blocks, really everything failed and slid away. You can see a little bit of a remnant of that yellow layer sticking out on this side of the slide. And some of the photographs that were taken on site allows you to see this really flat gray, or I should say planar gray failure surface. It's not at all flat. It tilts very steeply down the slope, and some of these intact areas that are kind of sticking out off the margins of the slide. Something interesting about this, and this is actually the first thing I thought when I saw this. It looks a lot like features that you see in the Appalachian Mountains, where there's a lot of tilted sedimentary rock that has failed in really monstrous landslides. These are, we would call these ancient features, prehistoric features. No one knows when they happened. They're quite old, but they're still very much visible in the landscape. You can see this big scar up on the ridge, this big lumpy deposit down here that I have highlighted with this kind of tan or yellow color. Layered sandstone, which is really easy to see in this LiDAR image, and that sandstone broke loose on a layer of shale here. The tilt in these rocks, the dip is very steep. So when that failure happened, it went really quick, broke apart, made this big lumpy deposit. And that's sort of the same idea of what you see in terms of the Papua New Guinea slide of May 2024. Comparisons go farther. The thing here in LiDAR in the background is actually just about exactly the same size. The deposit here is just a little bit longer than the one that developed in New Guinea, but the same type of the thing. This is in Southwest Virginia. It's really close to Roanoke. Actually, the Appalachian Trail, you can almost see it if the resolution's good enough. Right at the tip of the arrow, see a little grade on the slope there. That's actually the Appalachian Trail cutting across this thing. You can drive and park and walk to the top of this slide in just 5 minutes. You would not know that's what it is because it's old and covered in trees and everything now. But in terms of how it behaved, it's probably quite similar to what you saw there in New Guinea. And of course, if one of these happened today in Eastern North America, it would be a big thing. No one has ever seen anything like this happen in the Appalachians. And typically, when you think of a movement like this, something that you'd think of in an active tectonic landscape like New Guinea, or maybe in a landscape that was glaciated recently, like the European Alps would be a good example. There's plenty of landslides in the island of New Guinea. Of course, Papua New Guinea is kind of the eastern half of the island. The May 2024 slide is shown in orange here, moving downhill, cutting across that road that you can see making its way to the west here towards the bottom of the screen. Over across this river valley, there's another big slide you can see in Google Earth. Presumably some similarities. The colors that you get here suggest it may be similar materials. Looks like it has some intact blocks in it that did not break up, but most of this broke up and sort of flowed, maybe in a similar fashion to what we saw in May 24. And actually, if you look down here at the bottom of the hill, it's like the flow went down and sort of spread out. You can look at Google Earth in the vicinity of the slide from May 24, and I don't know how many failures like this you could find, dozens everywhere. And it's just it's a part of being in a landscape with this kind of rock, this kind of climate, and this kind of rapid tectonic uplift. You can mix in some land use details with that and make things even more lively. Not really going to get into that here, but suffice it to say, even without details of land use, this is a place that will see slope failure. So in terms of why it moved quick, it's the background geology, really steeply tilted layers. You got a weak layer in there. When that movement starts, it's not stopping. And we're talking about moving a slab of solid rock here, hundreds of feet wide, tens of feet thick. You break that apart, you're going to end up with a lot of big boulders. Now, thinking about that approximately 2,000-foot length, the human toll it's very significant here, and I think everyone knows that. But seeing it go as high as 2,000 people was very interesting. If you were to fit 2,000 people in the area covered by the slide, they would be very tightly packed. Not so much in like a shoulder to shoulder sense, but just thinking about that many people living there and the necessities of living in one place, that would be difficult. That's more city like in its density. There's one of the news article pictures where you can see a group of 8 or 10 people standing around. I drew a circle around them and copied paste, built it up where I actually had 200 of these 10-person circles. It essentially covers this entire area, and that's with them standing pretty close to each other, talking to one another. So in terms of thinking about that many people being there, being able to live, resources, dealing with waste, things like that, it would have been a very exceptional circumstance, and that may well have been the case. I've not seen any imagery of this site that was actually right before the failure. There is a huge gold mine, like I said, and that's not like an artisanal gold mine. It's a big industrial gold mine that is not far from here. The road at the bottom of the screen is what goes to that. So the population density may change considerably from time to time, and it may have changed a lot. You'll notice I'm running 2010 imagery here. It's just because it looks better. So I don't know for sure what this looked like, but again, to put 2,000 people there, it's almost like they would have selectively been occupying the space that ended up covered with the slide there. So it's I don't think it's impossible, but it would have required a very exceptional circumstance. Some of the last estimates I saw that were, I think, in news articles out of Australia had gone back down as low as just 200 or 300, which is very believable and is still, that's an extremely significant number of people. I mean, that's exceptional. I don't know how often during a given year that number of people are killed by a single slide event, but That's still a lot, but 2,000 is quite high. I'll be interested to see if you hear about this slide again. Honestly, it certainly here in the U.S. election year, a lot going on. I don't expect to see much about it in news outlets. I would like to think that there will be some, some geologic publications about it. I don't know, but it's one that's worth thinking about because there's a lot of geologic control over how it behaved. You can see that, and there's evidence in aerial imagery that you could see signs of a little bit of movement before this actually happened. It had been wet, I think, in the area, rainy. I think that's just kind of a PNG thing. I don't suppose there's any really extremely dry times. I presume they have a dry and a wet season, but this is not a dry landscape by any stretch. That heavy rainfall is a regular thing. Earthquakes are a regular thing of a variety of magnitudes that may have pushed this towards failure. My understanding is there was no single event, but I don't know that as well. And hopefully we'll be able to learn more from this because it is a very significant event. It just happened to occur in a place that is often difficult, I guess, to get news in and out of. So I'll put the coordinates for where it's located in the description down there and check it out. And certainly check out all the news articles. A lot of the images are Associated Press, so you see them in different agencies. But this was well documented, well photographed. There's some videos from on site, and they're pretty representative of what you'd expect from a big rock slide like this one.